These are the online instructions for Project 10, Audio 1. Click on Learning Module 11. That'll take you to this page. Click on the Project 10 link. And then click on this link to download the audio and video and the step-by-step instructions for Project 10. It'll be a zip file. You'll have to unzip it by double-clicking on it. When you do, then you'll open the folder. The top two items are the step-by-step instructions in Word and PDF format, then all the audio files you'll need, and also a QuickTime with the video, but only the count-off on the audio track for sync purposes. That's all that was included. Now I'm going to demo this in Adobe Audition. I'm going to open it either from the dock or from the Applications folder. It's your call. If you want to use Logic, GarageBand, Pro Tools, or some other app that supports video, that's perfectly fine. But you can't do it in an app that doesn't support video like Audacity. Once Audition launches, go to either File, New, Multitrack Session, do Command-N, or click on the little multitrack button, which is behind the menu that you're seeing there. And that'll create a new multitrack session. This window will open. Name the session, first name and last name. Put it on the desktop so you can find it. Don't use a template. Do it at 48K because it's a video, 32-bit stereo. That should all be fine. Click OK. Click Command-I then to import the audio files. There are a dozen files, and these are the individual stems from the band. So highlight them by clicking on the top one and then shift-clicking on the bottom one, or do Command-All. And then click OK, and there they are in your Files panel. Hit Command-I again because we need to get the video. So find the video in the Downloads folder, click on that, and again, OK, and import it, and there's the video. Notice it is nested this time. There's an audio and a video element for that. But the audio on the video is only the count-off. I didn't want to include the entire mix there. So you can drag those out onto the timeline, and you'll see the video creates its own video track, and then the audio is there. It's pretty much silence except for you can see the 2 and 4 when the singer is snapping 2 and 4, there's little blips. So now we're going to lock those down in time so they don't get inadvertently bumped out of sync. It's really easy to do just by slipping with the mouse and grabbing the video file when you're up at the top of the timeline, so it's a good idea to do this. Right-click and do Lock in Time, and you'll see a little lock icon appear on the file when you do that, and you know then they're locked and they're not going to move accidentally. So now, once that's done, we're going to add the audio track. So I'm going to grab all of them there. I can even grab the sequence. That won't actually go onto the timeline. And we're going to drag it onto the timeline. You want to make sure that they go on individual tracks like this. If not, hold down the Option key when you drag it on. At this point, we're not seeing all the tracks in the edit window, but we can make the window larger. We can drag it down to expose more, and now we can see all 13 tracks. There's the reference track plus the 12 audio stems. I need to get the audio and video in sync, so I'm going to take the vocal track and I'm going to move it up under the reference track because both of those have the count. And because the count-off is kind of hard to see on the vocal track, I'm going to go into the Properties panel and I'm going to turn it up 15 dB. That'll actually make the waveform taller. That didn't used to be the case, but in the newer versions of Audition, you actually see the waveform get bigger when you turn it up or down. So now I can compare the beats a little bit easier. Because all of the audio elements are in sync with each other, once I get the vocal track in sync, they all should be in sync. I'll lasso them all with the mouse or the Move tool, and then I'll hit Command-G to group them. And that way, when I move them, they'll all move together. Now I'm going to compare the beats between the reference track and the vocal track. There's the 2 and 4 on the vocal track, and above that you can see the 2 on the reference track right there. So I'm going to drag all of the audio elements to the right except for the reference track so that they line up. And I've done that, and I think I'm close, but I'm going to zoom in even more to see. That looks pretty good. I'm going to get even closer, and I'm moving it a little bit more, but now they're dead in sync. So now I'll highlight all of the files by dragging across them and hit Command-G again to ungroup them. They change back to their normal colors, and we should be in sync now. I've also taken the time to name all the tracks since we're going to be working a lot in the mixer window, and it's good to know what track we're working on. And this doesn't affect the audio one bit, but I've kind of rearranged the tracks, kind of the way we used to do it old school. I put the bass on track 1, and actually the reason for doing that is because track 1 was on the edge of the tape, and it would rub against the top flange and sometimes have an issue, but it didn't really affect the bass. So I got the bass on track 1, and then the kicks, and then the drums, and then the guitars, and then the keys, and the vocals, and the harp, and finally the crowd. I'm going to group the two crowd tracks by lassoing them with a mouse and hitting Command-G, because we need to kind of clean that up a little bit. Basically, they're picking up the audience responses, and anytime you do a live show, you want to get the audience. But they don't really need to be on most of the time for a couple of reasons. First of all, they're decreasing the presence by picking up the band at a distance. And secondly, the singer came in and actually re-sang his vocals, which happens a lot on live performances. So they're going to be picking up the original vocals from the PA system there. So what we need to do is find where we don't need this crowd and then delete it. The only time we really need this crowd is right after the harmonica solo. They do that small cheer, only for about 5 seconds. Then we're going to cut when the cheer dies out, put a little fade on it, and then go up to the very end where the audience comes in and applauds at the end of the song, and then we're going to delete all that stuff in between by hitting the delete key. We'll keep the ending and then put a little fade out over the ending, and we should be good. We can also group all of the other tracks the same way you would in Premiere by just highlighting them with the Move tool. And then we can actually drag them back a little bit and put a fade on those kind of simultaneously. Just by fading one, it'll actually fade all of those files that are sort of grouped now, just like that. The next thing we want to clean up is the vocal track. Notice there's the redone vocals. You can tell by the large amplitude envelope. And in fact, it's very quiet in between all those phrases. You don't hear any band. But then that other stuff there that looks like noise, that's actually the bleed from the back line getting picked up in the singer's mic. So we want to get rid of most of that because that's kind of destroying the presence. We want to hear the guitar right from the guitar amp, not 20 feet away on the singer's microphone there. So we're going to go through and just try to clean that up. Doing that will pay off big time with presence by tightening up the track. So I'm going to keep the 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to actually turn it up about 15 dB. That's about how much we turned it up originally so we could see it. But I'm going to turn up 15 dB because it's very low in volume. And then the next section is the bleed before the singer actually comes in. That's when the band plays like the first verse. So we're just going to highlight that and delete it. Just leave blank there. Also, between the first verse and second verse, we're going to blow that off as well. Highlight it and delete it. And then between the next two vocal phrases, we're going to highlight the bleed and delete it. We don't really need to do anything after that. There's more vocal track there, but it's actually silence. I went ahead and did that when I made the file originally. I definitely should have done this earlier, but I'm going to highlight all of the audio clips there and right-click and do a lock in time. Then I'm going to go to the reference audio from the video, and I'm going to mute that. I could, just do a regular mute, but I don't have a lot of confidence that the mutes are not going to get unmuted accidentally. So if we do a hard mute like that, that's like a clip enable in Premiere, and that'll never get played. Here's something we've not done before. We're going to use pan pots. Pan pots were invented back in the 1930s, but they didn't really appear on consoles until the late 60s. They're useful for positioning sound in the stereo field. Now, we could look at the band and say, okay, let's just orient it the way they are on stage, but that's kind of weird because they've got two drummers, one you don't even see is off the screen to the left, and the bass player's here on the left side, the singer's kind of in the middle, then you have the two guitar players next to each other and the keyboard player on the far right. That would be a really weird balance. So instead, we're going to kind of put the drummers on both sides, hard left and hard right. And that way you know it's two drummers and not just one big macho drummer in the middle. We'll take the kick drums, though, and put them closer to the center, probably maybe 15 degrees either side of center. We're going to put the bass in the center as well. Bass had always been in the center on records because often the needle would jump out of the groove if the bass wasn't in the center. That's not an issue with digital files, but still it's best to distribute the power evenly between left and right. So, for example, the left side isn't louder than the right or vice versa. Some records have had the bass on left or right, but it's still best to be in the center. We're going to put the guitars about 50% left and 50% right. That'll give them their own space on stage. They're not competing with anybody in the stereo field in that position. In those locations, they can be heard, and we can tell they're two different guitar players by the spatial separation. We're going to put the singer in the center. That's typical. The singer's the star of the show, the most important thing to hear. So we want to make sure that the singer is centered. Also, the harmonica will go in the center as well. The harmonica doesn't play except when the singer's not singing. Kind of takes over the center position. I mean, the harmonica does do some stuff underneath the singer but kind of lays back. And for the keys, we're going to kind of do a fake synthesized stereo thing for them, which will spread them out across the stereo field. It's actually harder to get a good mono mix than a good stereo mix, since the stereo separation makes it easier to hear everything. So that's our pan plan. Here's what it looks like with the pan pots. The bass is centered, the kicks are 15% left and right respectively, the drums are 100% left and right respectively, the guitars are 50% left and right respectively. You can actually turn it with a mouse, but if you type in -100, that's left 100. If you type in 100, it's plus 100. You can also type in L100 and R100 to get those. Here it is on the keys. The keys are centered, the harp is centered, the vocal is centered. The room mics are left and right. Just like we made the edit window larger, we can also make the mixer window larger just by dragging it out. Now I'm doing something here. I'm going to go to the keys track, and in the multi-track menu, I'm going to go to tracks, duplicate selected track, and I'm going to duplicate the keys track. So we have two of them now. Nothing's really changed except they're probably going to be louder because we have two of them. But now I'm going to pan one hard left and one hard right by going like -100 and just 100. Again, nothing's changed. It's still going to sound like it's coming from the center, but the EQ on one of the keys tracks, I'm going to go -10, +10, -10, +10 on 2, 3, 4, 5 respectively. On the other one, I'm going to go +10, -10, +10, -10 on 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's going to give kind of a weird home filtering effect where certain frequencies are going to appear louder on one side versus the other. But when you sum them in mono, the result should be no different from the original mono signal. This idea actually dates back to the 60s with the Orban stereo synthesizer. It actually had a mono input and a stereo output. This is a Waves plugin that I use quite often. It does the same thing. It's basically home filtering, and you put one in and you get two signals out. But we're able to create the same thing with just conventional equalizers. And when you look at the meters for the keys tracks, you can see the meters changing. If the signals were identical mono signals, the two meters would be in lockstep with each other. So it truly does look like a stereo signal. This doesn't work with everything. It works better on things that have a broad frequency range, so you can actually make use of all those octaves. Another thing that we're going to do, like we typically do for dialogue, we're going to add some brightness to the lead singer to just give him more presence, make him cut through a little better. So just a little high-end EQ. We're also going to add some EQ to the drums. One thing you miss when you have an ensemble like this with guitars, keys, bass, and drums is that they don't have much going on in those top two octaves. But the cymbals can fill those in, that 5K to 20K range. So we're going to brighten up the cymbals a little bit on drummer number 1, and then we're going to do the same thing on drummer number 2. And it's going to kind of fill in and make this mix sound a little bit more full range. Because if you're paying for 10 octaves of sound, you ought to get all 10 octaves, not just 8. So you can kind of compare, here's drummer number 2 with no EQ at all. And here he is with EQ added. And we're going to do the same with drummer number 1. That'll fill in the top two octaves a little bit better on him as well and kind of make this more hi-fi. It appears that the vocal track may be a little high in volume. You can actually turn it down, but that's post-fade, and it still may distort some of the plugins. So I'm going to use the clip gain and turn all of those vocal sections, except for the count-off, down 4 dB. That'll make it lay in a little bit better. And when I do that, you can actually see the waveform get smaller. Of course, this would have been easier to do had I noticed it earlier when this was all one piece. I could have just done it once as opposed to multiple times. Next, as we typically do, I'm going to add a limiter to the singer to keep the dynamic range of the singer more even, and it'll kind of keep him front and center a little bit better. I'm going to use the multiband compressor, but it appears that I'm seeing more than 3 dB of gain reduction, so I'm going to raise the threshold from -21 to -19. It doesn't affect the sound one bit, but some people still like to do it. I'm going to color code some of the tracks. We're going to color code the drums one color and the guitars one color, etc. Typically, my rule on this is if it's a project that I'm working on for a long period of time, this may be helpful. If it's a very quick in and out project, this is kind of a waste of time. But you open the color palette by double-clicking on the color bar at the left edge of the track on the edit window or the bottom of the track in the mixer window. And there are the track colors. I'm going to add some spatial effects now. I'm going to hit Option B to create two buses, one for reverb. I'm going to label that bus A reverb, and bus B I'm going to label as echo. Spatial effects help put the band in an environment that maybe sounds kind of cool, like a big venue, even though they may be in a tiny room. Spatial effects can also add some energy to the mix as well. Echo happens when the listener hears a distinct return of the sound that was being produced. Reverb is produced when the echo arrivals are so closely spaced that the listener doesn't perceive them as separate events. On the reverb bus on one of the effects ends, I'm going to go to the reverb plugins folder and add reverb, which works well. And you get this message that says, this is a compute-intensive plugin, so you don't want to use too many of these. One of the biggest issues people had early on with reverbs is they would put a lot of reverbs, they would do them in series, they would just put them on the track. We're going to do this in parallel, so we're only going to be using one reverb. And in fact, I'm not even sure we're going to use reverb at all, but we're going to have it anyway, just in case. And when the reverb comes up, the only thing I'm going to change is the decay time. It normally instantiates with like 700 milliseconds, which is a tiny room. I'm going to make it like 2500. And then as far as the output level, I'm going to set the dry to 0. Dry is the unprocessed signal. And the wet to 100. And now you see the wet goes up to 500, but that's just like the amp going up to 11. You can make it louder. But this way we're only getting processed signal out of the reverb because we're going to do it as a parallel process. Now for the echo, I'm going to instantiate the one that just says echo. And I've used that before. That one is fairly simple to use too. The only thing I have to know is the delay time. Normally, echoes work in beats per minute, but in Audition, they want it in milliseconds. So I'm going to go to the Preferences, and in the time display, I'm going to change it back from time code to decimals, minutes, seconds, and milliseconds. And that way, I can look at a beat of music, and I can see how many milliseconds it is. So I want to fill those two positions there, the two delay times. Everything else is pretty much fine the way it is. So the way I'm going to find the delay time, I'm going to look at kick number 2, playing quarter notes most of the time. So every one of those is a beat. I'll highlight it and look at the properties panel, and it says it's 440 milliseconds. So that's the number I'll plug in for the quarter note, and then I'll plug in half of that for an eighth note, 220 on the right side. And that's all I need to do, and we're set on the echo. I'm going to assign echo to the singer. I'm going to take one of the 16 buses and assign it to the echo, and we're going to send a portion of the singer to the echo.
Step down, baby, from your moving Cadillac. Step down.
And it may sound like a little bit too much there, but we're out of context, and when we get all the other instruments in, we really won't hear that much echo. In this mix, the guitars might actually benefit from some echo as well, so I'm going to take bus 1 on the guitar tracks and make that an echo bus. And the harp or harmonica could benefit from some echo. I'm not going to really demonstrate it for you, but I want to show you where it is. Under Special, there's Guitar Suite. This is an amp modeling program, and it's kind of neat. I don't want to use it on any of these things because everybody's kind of got a nice amp setting going on, but if you had a session with direct boxes, you could dial up certain presets and kind of get the amplifier sound that you wanted, even without an amplifier, which is pretty cool. I use this all the time when I record guitar. I just plug in and use this to get the sound I want. Okay, the mix should be fairly straightforward. These guys kind of play with their own dynamics. Once they get a level, they kind of stay with it, and they kind of turn up and down automatically for solos. So once you get a level set for that instrument, it's probably not going to need to be adjusted. You can kind of mix this old school, in fact. Just pull up the mixer window, play the track, and bump up the bass or turn down the guitars or do whatever you want to do just with the faders, and it should work. The biggest mistake students have made on this project, maybe the guitars will be way too loud for the rest of the ensemble, or the vocalist will be so loud it sounds like the band's in a different room. You want to make sure you can hear everything, make sure the singer is surrounded by the music. You want to hear the singer, but it has to be surrounded by the music. If you do feel like you need to do any mixing, just add keyframes and adjust the yellow volume line. For example, that's a guitar solo that if you feel like you have to bump it up, you can just bump it up a little bit, but you probably don't have to do that with this project. These guys kind of play their own dynamics. So once you're happy with your mix, then go to File, Export with Adobe Media Encoder, because we want to see the picture. Part of the project is getting the audio and video in sync. Adobe Media Encoder will launch, and then select the H.264 codec. That'll, again, generate a video that's about the same quality as what we started with, and it won't be too big. It'll be a nice size. All the other default settings there will work just fine. Once you've done that, then go back to the project page, click Submit Assignment, browse your computer for the assignment, and then submit it, and you're done.